High Commander Vexorus stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the stars spin past the viewing screen with cold satisfaction in his 4 eyes. Zithrani Empire had ruled the Orion Arm for 12,000 years, and in all that time, no species had ever truly challenged their power. They were the masters of the galaxy, and every civilization they encountered learned this truth quickly. Some learned it through diplomacy and submission, while others learned it through fire and destruction. Either way, the lesson was always the same, and Vexorus had taught it many times before. Day would be no different. Commander, we are approaching the target system, his navigation officer announced from across the crystalline bridge. Vexorus turned his long, elegant neck and regarded the officer with casual interest. The system called Sol, he said, slowly tasting the strange word. Home of the species called humans. Yes, Commander. Vexorus walked to his command throne and settled into it with the grace that came from centuries of military service. Behind him, through the transparent walls of the bridge, he could see his fleet stretching out into the darkness of space. 200 warships of the Zithrani Third Expansion Fleet. Each vessel was a masterpiece of elegant design, with flowing curves and crystalline hulls to caught the light of distant stars. They were beautiful and deadly, and they had never known defeat. Tell me again about these humans. Vexorus commanded. His science officer Phila stepped forward and activated a holographic display in the center of the bridge. Images appeared showing a small blue and green world orbiting a yellow star. The humans are a young species, Commander, Phila explained in her soft melodic voice. They achieved space travel less than 200 years ago and have only recently begun to expand beyond their home world. Primitive Vexorus said with a dismissive wave of his clawed hand. Indeed, Commander, Phila continued. They are soft-bodied creatures with short lifespans averaging only about 80 to 100 years. Several officers on the bridge made sounds of amusement at this. The Zithrani lived for thousands of years, and the idea of a species with such brief lives seemed almost tragic. They have established small colonies on nearby planets and moons in their system, Phila said, but they remain confined to this single star system. Their military capabilities, Vexorus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer would be disappointing. Minimal, Commander, Phila replied. Our intelligence suggests they possess a small defensive fleet of perhaps 50 to 60 vessels. 50 ships, Vexorus repeated with clear amusement, against our 200. Yes, Commander, and their technology appears to be quite crude compared to our own. Of course it is. Vexorus leaned back in his throne and steepled his long fingers together. The Galactic Council had already reviewed the humans and dismissed them as insignificant. They were just another young species stumbling into the wider universe without any understanding of their place in it. The Council had assigned the Zithrani to deliver the standard ultimatum: submit to protect its status under the Empire or face complete annihilation. It was a simple choice, really. We will emerge from faster-than-light travel at the edge of their system, Vexorus announced to his bridge crew. We will broadcast the surrender demand and give them 1 hour to comply. And if they refuse, Commander, one of his tactical officers asked. Vexorus smiled, showing rows of sharp crystalline teeth. Then we will show them the cost of defiance. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel with a flash of blue energy that rippled across space. Vexorus looked at the viewing screen and saw the Sol system spread out before him. It was unremarkable, really, a medium-sized yellow star surrounded by 8 planets and various smaller bodies. The third planet from the star was the one called Earth, and even from this distance he could see its blue oceans and white clouds. Pretty, he supposed, in a simple sort of way. Open a communication channel to the planet, Vexorus commanded. All frequencies. Channel open, Commander. Vexorus stood from his throne and straightened his ceremonial armor. He had delivered this message dozens of times before, and he knew exactly what to say. "Attention, inhabitants of the Sol System," he began in a voice full of authority and power. "I am High Commander Vexorus of the Zithrani Third Expansion Fleet, speaking on behalf of the Zithrani Empire and the Galactic Council." He paused for dramatic effect. "Your species has been evaluated and found to be of minimal strategic importance. However, your system contains resources that are of interest to the greater galactic community." Another pause. "You are hereby ordered to submit to protectorate status under the Zithrani Empire, and all military vessels, spacecraft, and weapon systems will be surrendered." Immediately, he allowed his voice to grow harder and more threatening. "Failure to comply within 1 hour will result in the complete destruction of your civilization, and your species will be erased from the records of galactic history. This is your only warning." Vexorus ended the transmission and returned to his throne with satisfaction now. They would wait, the humans would panic and argue among themselves, and eventually they would surrender. They always did, Commander Phyllis said suddenly, with a strange note in her voice. "We are receiving a response already." Vexorus raised what passed for an eyebrow among his species. "That was fast." "Yes, Commander, but the message is very short." "Display it." The holographic screen flickered and a single line of text appeared in the center of the bridge. It reads simply, "You have entered restricted space, and you have 60 seconds to withdraw." Silence fell across the bridge of Vexorus. Stared at the message for a long moment, and then he began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle and built into a full roaring laugh that echoed off the crystalline walls. His officers joined in one by one until the entire bridge was filled with the sound of Zithrani amusement. 60 seconds, Vexorus managed to say between laughs. "They give us 60 seconds. "The arrogance, Commander," one of his tactical officers said while wiping tears from his eyes. "It is almost admirable." "Almost," Vexorus agreed. He waved his hand dismissively at the message on the screen. "Ignore it and begin advancing toward the inner system." "Yes, Commander." The fleet began to move forward with 200 crystalline warships gliding through space like a school of deadly predators. Vexorus watched the blue dot of Earth grow slowly larger on his screen and felt nothing but contempt for the creatures who lived there. They would learn their place soon enough, Commander, Thilla said suddenly, and this time her voice held something Vexorus had never heard from her before. It sounded almost like concern. "What is it?" he asked without much interest. "Long-range sensors are detecting a vessel emerging from behind the fourth planet." "A vessel?" Vexorus repeated, singular. "Yes, Commander, just one ship." Vexorus almost laughed again, but something in Thilla's tone made him pause. "Show me," he commanded. The viewing screen shifted to display the area of space near the large ringed gas giant. At first Vexorus saw nothing but empty void and distant stars. Then the image enhanced, and he could make out a single dark shape moving slowly out from the planet's shadow. It was a ship. One ship. They send one vessel against 200. Vexorus said with disbelief in his voice. "Are they insane?" "Unknown, Commander, but the ship is approaching on an intercept course." Vexorus studied the tiny dot on his screen and felt a flicker of curiosity beneath his contempt. What kind of species sends a single ship against an armada? A foolish one, he decided. A species that would not survive much longer. "Do not bother raising shields," he commanded his fleet. "Let them come. We will show these humans what happens when insects challenge gods." The human ship grew larger on the viewing screen with every passing minute, and the bridge crew of the Zithrani flagship watched it approach with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. Varys leaned forward in his command throne and studied the vessel with his 4 narrow eyes. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The Zithrani built their ships with flowing curves and elegant lines that reflected the beauty of their ancient civilization. Their vessels were works of art as much as weapons of war, with crystalline hulls that sparkled like jewels in the starlight. The human ship was none of these things. It was ugly. There was no other word for it. The vessel was all harsh angles and flat surfaces covered in thick black plating that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It had no grace and no elegance and no apparent concern for aesthetics whatsoever. It looked less like a ship and more like a brutal slab of metal that had been beaten into a vaguely functional shape. "What a hideous thing," one of the bridge officers muttered. "Indeed," Vexorus agreed. "It appears these humans have no appreciation for beauty." "Commander," Science Officer Thilla spoke up from her station, "I am completing detailed scans of the approaching vessel." "And what do your scans reveal?" Vexorus asked with mild interest. Thilla's long fingers moved across her console and her expression slowly changed from professional detachment to something that looked almost like confusion. "The ship is approximately 800 meters in length," she reported, "which makes it comparable to one of our medium cruisers." "One ship against 200, Vexorus repeated with a thin smile. "This will not take long." "Yes, Commander, however there are some anomalies in the sensor data that I do not understand. Explain." Thilla enlarged the scan results on the central holographic display and pointed to several readings with evident uncertainty. "The hull composition is extremely dense, Commander," she said. "Far denser than any material we commonly use in shipbuilding." "Primitive construction methods," Vexorus dismissed. "They probably lack the technology for lighter and stronger alloys." "Perhaps, Commander, but the power readings are also unusual." "Unusual? How?" Thilla hesitated, which was something Vexorus had never seen her do before in her 3 centuries of service. "They keep fluctuating wildly," she finally said. "It is as if something inside the ship is barely contained, probably an unstable reactor," Vexorus said with a wave of his hand. "Another sign of their primitive technology." "Yes, Commander, that is most likely the explanation." But Thilla did not sound entirely convinced. Vexorus noticed this, but chose to ignore it had destroyed dozens of civilizations across the galaxy, and he knew what a threat looked like. This human ship, whatever its strange readings might indicate, was not a threat. It was a curiosity at best and a minor obstacle at worst. "Can you identify the vessel?" he asked Thilla. Adjusted our sensors, and the image on the screen sharpened to reveal markings painted on the black hull of the human ship, strange symbols that the translation systems quickly converted into Zithrani text. "The ship appears to be named," Thilla said. Slowly, UN Wrath of Achilles. Wrath of Achilles. Vexorus repeated the strange words. "What does that mean?" "Unknown, Commander, but I'm accessing the human cultural database we acquired." She worked at her console for a moment. "Achilles appears to have been a warrior from human mythology," she reported. "He was said to be the greatest fighter of his era and was known for his terrible rage in battle." "How dramatic," Vexorus said with clear sarcasm. "They named their ships after angry warriors from old stories. It would appear so, Commander. Enough of this." Vexorus stood from his throne and straightened his armor. "I grow tired of watching this insect crawl toward us." He turned to his weapons officer. "Fire a warning shot across their bow." "Yes, Commander." The weapons officer activated the primary beam array of the flagship and targeted a point just ahead of the approaching human ship. A lance of brilliant blue energy shot across the void of space with perfect precision. It was meant to pass harmlessly in front of the human vessel, demonstrating the power of Zithrani weapons without causing actual damage. But something went wrong. The human ship did not turn or attempt to evade. Instead, it adjusted its course, slightly, almost as if deliberately, and the warning shot struck its hull directly. "Direct impact, Commander," the weapons officer reported with surprise. "The human vessel moved into the path of our beam." "Did they want to be hit?" Vexorus asked with genuine confusion. "Unknown, Commander. Every eye on the bridge watched the viewing screen, waiting for the human ship to explode, or at least show significant damage. The blue energy of the Zithrani beam weapon was powerful enough to slice through most warships with ease, but the human vessel did not explode. The beam struck the black hull and simply disappeared. There was no explosion and no debris and no visible damage at all. Ship continued on its approach. As if nothing had happened, silence fell across the bridge. Thilla, Vexorus said. Slowly, what just happened? The science officer was already working frantically at her console, with her long fingers flying across the controls. Commander, she said, and now there was real fear in her voice. Their armor is not reflecting our weapons. Then, what is it doing? It is absorbing them. Vexorus felt something cold move through his chest. In 12,000 years of Zithrani dominance, no species had ever developed armor that could absorb their beam weapons. It should not be possible. Impossible. The weapons officer whispered, echoing Vexorus's thoughts. And yet, we just witnessed it. Thilla replied. The human ship had now stopped moving. It hung in space perhaps 10,000 kilometers from the kilometers. From the human ship had now stopped moving. It hung in space perhaps 10,000 kilometers from the Mendias. Zithrani fleet like a predator watching its prey. Then the ship began to change. Panels along its hull slid open with mechanical precision, revealing hidden compartments beneath the black armor. Weapons. Ports, and lots of them. Vexorus counted quickly and felt his cold feeling grow colder. There were dozens of weapons ports opening along the length of the human vessel, then dozens more. Ships seemed to unfold like some terrible mechanical flower, with layer after layer of concealed armaments emerging from within its ugly, brutal frame. That is not possible. Thilla breathed. A ship that size cannot hold that many weapon systems. And yet, Vexorus said quietly, there they are. The human ship now bristled with weapons missile, tubes and gun barrels and strange devices that the Zithrani sensors could not identify. It looked less like a warship now, and more like a fortress that had somehow been compressed into a mobile platform. Commander, the communications officer spoke up. We are receiving a new transmission from the human vessel. Let us hear. The bridge speakers crackled, and then a human voice emerged. It was calm and steady, and completely without fear. Warning shot, acknowledged. The voice said, here is ours. A single flash of light erupted from the human ship, not a beam weapon like the Zithrani used, but something else, something physically projectile of some kind. It crossed the distance between the human ship and the Zithrani fleet in less than a second, too fast for shields to react, too fast for evasive maneuvers. The projectile struck a Zithrani destroyer near the front of the formation and passed completely through it from bow to stern. For a moment nothing seemed to happen, then the destroyer broke apart. It did not explode, gracefully like ships did in the old war stories. It simply came apart as if all the forces holding it together had suddenly stopped working. Debris, an atmosphere and bodies spilled out into the cold vacuum of space. Commander, the tactical officer's voice was shaking now. That projectile punched through the destroyer shields and armor as if they were not there. Vexorus stared at the wreckage of his ship and at the crew members dying in the void. He had lost ships before. That was the nature of war. But he had never lost one like this, so quickly, and so easily to a single shot from a single enemy. What manner of weapon was that? He demanded. A kinetic projectile, Commander. Thilla answered. A physical round accelerated to an enormous velocity. A bullet, Vexorus said with disbelief. They shot us with a bullet. A very large and very fast bullet, Commander, yes. The human ship sat motionless in space, with its weapons still deployed, and its dark hull still unmarked by the Zithrani beam that had struck it. Waiting. Commander, the communications officer said, what are your orders? Vexorus looked at the human vessel, and for the first time in his very long life, he felt something he did not recognize. It took him a moment to identify it. It was doubt. Vexorus shook off his momentary doubt and felt cold anger replace. I was High Commander of the 3rd Expansion Fleet, and he had conquered worlds and crushed civilizations, and he would not be intimidated by one ugly ship and one lucky shot. All ships raise shields to maximum, he commanded. All weapons batteries target the human vessel. Commander, his tactical officer, hesitated. Should we not attempt to communicate first? They destroyed one of my ships. Vexorus snarled. Communication. Time is over. He stood tall on his command bridge and pointed at the dark shape of the human vessel on his viewing screen. All ships fire. 200 Zithrani warships open fire simultaneously. The space around the human ship became a storm of brilliant blue energy as beam weapons from every vessel in the fleet converged on a single target. Plasma bolts and particle lances and focused. Radiation beams all struck the black hull of the Wrath of Achilles in an overwhelming display of firepower. The light was so intense that the viewing screens had to automatically dim to protect the eyes of the bridge crews. Barrage continued for 30 seconds with enough destructive power to crack a small moon. Then, the weapons fell silent smoke and debris, and ionized particles filled the space where the human ship had been. Vexorus leaned forward with anticipation, waiting for the cloud to clear. Report, he demanded. Is the target destroyed? Sensors are having difficulty penetrating the debris field. Commander, Thilla reported, attempting to get a clear reading. The seconds stretched out painfully long, then the debris began to clear, and the human ship was still there, was damaged now with sections of its black armor glowing red from absorbed energy and small fires burning in places where the hull had been breached. But it was intact, and it was moving. That is impossible. The weapons officer whispered, We hit it with everything we have. Apparently everything we have is not enough. Thilla replied grimly. The human ship began to accelerate directly toward the Zithrani fleet, and then it began to fire back. Vexorus had seen many weapons in his long career, but he had never seen anything like what the humans unleashed. Massive railgun turrets along the spine of the ship discharged with visible recoil, sending tungsten rounds the size of ground cars hurtling through space at a significant fraction of light speed missile. Tubes vomited swarms of warheads that split apart into thousands of smaller munitions, each one tracking a different target point. Defense systems created walls of metal fragments that shredded anything that came close, and there were other weapons, two weapons, that the Zithrani could not identify. Strange devices that seemed to project fields of distorted space launchers that fired objects that did not behave like normal matter things that should not exist according to Zithrani science. Evasive maneuvers, Vexorus screamed. All ships scatter, but it was too late for many of them. The first volley of railgun rounds tore through 5 destroyers before anyone could react. Missiles found their targets with terrifying precision and detonated against shields that had never been designed to stop physical impact. Ships began to die, not gracefully with the slow fate of failing systems, but violently with hulls rupturing and reactors breaching and crews being hurled into the uncaring void. Commander, we are taking heavy casualties, the tactical officer reported with panic in his voice. Return fire, Vexorus commanded. Do not stop firing. The Zithrani fleet rallied and poured more energy into the attacking human ship beams, and bolts struck it from every direction. The black armor absorbed some of the energy, but not all of it. Sections of the hull were beginning to melt and glow white-hot. External systems were being destroyed, but the ship would not die. It fought like a wounded animal, savage and relentless, and seemingly without any concern for its own survival. Every time the Zithrani thought they had crippled a weapons system, another one would activate to take its place. Ship had so many redundant systems that destroying one barely seemed to matter. Commander, Thilla called out over the chaos of the battle, I have been analyzing the human ship's design. Is this really the time for analysis? Vexorus snapped. Yes, Commander, because I believe I understand what we are facing. She brought up a display showing the internal structure of the human vessel based on sensor data. This ship has no dedicated living quarters, she said. The crew compartments are minimal and heavily armored. So what? So the humans have sacrificed comfort and safety and every other consideration to pack more weapons into their ship. She highlighted section after section of the vessel. Weapons storage here and here and here, she said. Redundant targeting systems throughout the hull and multiple backup reactors and ammunition magazines in every section. This ship was not designed for exploration or diplomacy, Commander. It was designed for one purpose only, to kill. As if to emphasize her point, the human ship fired another volley of railgun rounds that punched through a Zithrani cruiser. From stem to stern, the cruiser broke in half, and both pieces began to spin away into the darkness, trailing fire and debris. 57 ships destroyed, Commander, the tactical officer reported. We have lost over a quarter of our fleet. Vexorus could not believe what he was hearing. In his entire career, he had never lost more than a handful of ships in any engagement. Now, he was losing dozens to a single enemy. Commander, I am detecting something else. Phila said suddenly. What now? I have been researching human military history in our database. Why? Because I wanted to understand how they think. She pulled up a document on her screen, and her face grew pale. The humans have something called the Geneva Convention, she said. It is an agreement between their nations about how wars should be fought. What does this have to do with anything? The Geneva Convention includes a list of weapons that humans agreed not to use against each other. Phila looked up from her screen with something like horror in her eyes. The Wrath of Achilles is currently using several of them. Before Vexorus could respond to this disturbing revelation, the sensors detected 3 new contacts emerging from faster-than-light travel behind the Zithrani fleet. 3 more human ships incoming, Commander. The tactical officer shouted. Vexorus spun to look at the new arrivals on his screen. These ships were larger than the Wrath of Achilles, much larger. The lead vessel was nearly 2 kilometers long, and it bristled with even more weapons than the ship they were already fighting. We are receiving an identification signal from the lead ship, the communications officer reported. What is it called? UEN, remember Thermopylae, Commander. Vexorus did not know what Thermopylae meant, but he suspected it was another reference to human warriors and human battles and human rage. Their weapons are already charging, Commander. The Zithrani High Commander looked at his battered fleet and at the burning wreckage of his destroyed ships and at the 4 human vessels that now surrounded him. He made the only decision he could. All ships read, he ordered. Jump to faster than light immediately. But Commander, our shields need time to reconfigure for FTL travel. The navigation officer protested. Then reconfigure them while running. Vexorus snarled. Get us out of here now. The surviving Zithrani ships began to turn away from the battle with their engines flaring to maximum power, but the humans were not finished. Remember, Thermopylae opened fire with a weapon that Vexorus had never seen before, a beam of pure white energy that cut through 3 Xi ships like they were made of paper. What was that? Someone screamed. Unknown, Commander. Phila answered. Our sensors cannot identify the energy signature. More ships died as the Zithrani fleet fled. The humans pursued for a short distance, but then stopped allowing the survivors to escape. Perhaps they were satisfied. Perhaps they were simply letting the Zithrani carry a message back to the rest of the galaxy. Commander, Phila said quietly as they finally jumped to faster-than-light speed. Final casualty report. How many? Vexorus asked, though he did not want to know. 153. Ships destroyed, she said. 47 remain operational. Vexorus closed his 4 eyes and let the weight of that number settle over him. He had brought 200 warships to conquer a primitive species. He was leaving with less than 50, and he had only faced 4 of their vessels. What are they? He whispered to no one in particular. Phila looked at the fading stars on the viewing screen and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The remnants of the Zithrani fleet drifted in deep space far from the Sol system, licking their wounds and counting their dead. Vexorus stood on the bridge of his damaged flagship and stared at nothing. 3 of his ship's decks were venting atmosphere into space, and the repair crews were working constantly to keep the vessel from falling apart completely. Around him, the other 46 surviving ships were in similar condition, burned and battered and broken. 153 vessels destroyed, thousands upon thousands of Zithrani soldiers dead, all because of 4 human ships. 4. Commander, his communications officer spoke hesitantly. We are receiving a transmission from the Sol system. Vexorus turned slowly with exhaustion heavy in every movement. What do they want? He asked. To gloat over their victory. No, Commander, they are requesting a meeting to discuss terms. Terms? Vexorus repeated the word with bitter amusement. They wish to negotiate after they have already won. It appears so, Commander. Vexorus considered refusing. He considered ordering his remaining ships to jump far away and never return to this cursed region of space. But he knew that would solve nothing. The humans had proven themselves capable of things the Zithrani could not match. If they wanted to negotiate, then perhaps there was still a way to salvage something from this disaster. Tell them I will meet with their representative, he said finally. 1 ship may approach. Yes, Commander. An hour later, a small human shuttle, docked with the Zithrani flagship Vexorus, waited in the main meeting chamber, surrounded by his senior officers and a full squad of elite guards. He wanted the humans to see that despite their defeat, the Zithrani were still a proud and powerful people. The doors opened and the human delegation entered. There were only 3 of them. The leader was a female human with black hair turning gray at the temples and dark eyes that seemed to see everything at once. She wore a uniform covered in medals and ribbons that Vexorus assumed represented her military achievements. Behind her walked 2 human soldiers in powered armored. Armor was massive and heavy and covered in weapons. It made the elite Zithrani guards look like children playing at war. I am Admiral Keiko Tanaka of the United Earth Navy, the female human said in a calm, clear voice. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Commander Vexorus. Vexorus studied her carefully. She showed no fear standing in the heart of an enemy vessel, surrounded by aliens who had every reason to hate her species. You wish to discuss terms, he said coldly. Then discuss. Admiral Tanaka nodded and clasped her hands behind her back. The terms are simple, she said. Your fleet will leave the Sol system and never return, and you will report to your superiors that humanity is not to be threatened or attacked. And if we refuse, then we will destroy your remaining ships and send the same message ourselves. Her tone was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather rather than the potential extinction of his fleet. Vexorus felt anger rise in his chest, but he forced it down. Getting angry would not help him now. Before I agree to anything, he said slowly, I want to understand. Understand what? How? He leaned forward with genuine confusion on his face. How did you do this? I do not understand your question, Commander. Your species achieved space travel less than 200 years ago, Vexorus said. You are young and primitive and confined to a single system, and yet you just defeated a fleet that has conquered hundreds of worlds. He spread his hands in a gesture of helpless bewilderment. How is that possible? Admiral Tanaka was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in her expression, and Vexorus saw sadness flicker across her features. May I sit down, Commander? Vexorus gestured to a chair across from his own. The Admiral sat, and her armored guards took positions behind her with their weapons held ready. You asked how we defeated you, she began. The answer is not a pleasant one. Tell me anyway. Very well. She took a breath and began. Your empire has ruled this region of space for 12,000 years, Commander, and in that time, you have faced what exactly? We have fought many wars. Vexorus said defensively. Have you? Tanaka raised an eyebrow. From what our intelligence suggests, your wars have been border skirmishes and suppression, campaigns against species far less advanced than yourselves. You have never faced an equal. Vexorus wanted to argue, but he could not. She was right. Zithrani had been dominant for so long that they had forgotten what real war looked like. Humanity is different, Tanaka continued. We have been at war with ourselves for our entire existence. With yourselves. Dilla spoke up from her position behind. Vexorus, you mean civil wars? I mean all wars, Tanaka replied. We have never known true peace. Every generation of humans has fought and died in conflicts with other humans. Every century has brought new wars and new weapons and new ways to kill. She held up one hand and began counting on her fingers. We have had wars over territory and resources and religion and ideology and sometimes for no good reason at all. We have developed weapons specifically designed to kill as many of our own kind as possible. We split the atom, and within years we used that knowledge to vaporize cities. Vexorus felt a chill run through him. At her words, your species destroyed your own cities, he asked with disbelief. 2 of them, Tanaka confirmed, in a single war that killed approximately 70 million humans over 6 years. The number hung in the air like a curse, 70 million. Dead in 6 years, the Zithrani had never experienced casualties on that scale in their entire history. That war was not even our worst. Tanaka added quietly. It was simply the most recent example of large-scale conflict before we achieved space travel. You see, Commander, your people build beautiful ships and elegant weapons because you have the luxury of caring about such things. You have never been desperate. You have never been fighting for survival against an enemy just as determined and just as capable as yourselves. She gestured toward the armored soldiers behind her. Human weapons are not elegant because we do not have time for elegance. We build what works. We build what kills. And we have had 10,000 years of practice. Vexorus sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he was hearing. He had assumed that humanity's victory was due to some secret technology or hidden advantage. He had never considered that they might simply be better at war because war was all they had ever known. Your ships, he said slowly, they are designed without comfort or beauty because you do not value those things. We value them, Tanaka corrected, but we value survival more. When you are at war, you cannot afford to waste space on luxuries. Every cubic meter of a human warship is dedicated to weapons or armor or redundant systems. We expect our ships to take damage because in a real war, they always do. We expect to lose crews because in a real war, we always do. She leaned forward with intensity in her dark eyes. Commander, your fleet fought like soldiers who had never truly faced death. My ship fought like soldiers who expected to die and were determined to take the enemy with them. That is the difference. Vexorus looked at this small, soft-bodied creature with her short lifespan and her species' history of self-destruction. He had thought humans were primitive. He realized now that they were something far more dangerous. They were survivors of a never-ending war against themselves, and that war had forged them into something terrible. What are your terms? He asked quietly. Leave our system and do not return. Tanaka said, tell the Galactic Council that humanity wishes for peace and trade and friendship. But also, tell them this. Her voice hardened. Our willingness to pursue peace should not be mistaken for an inability to wage war. We have buried enough of our own children on 100 battlefields. We do not wish to bury yours as well, but we will. If forced, we will. Vexorus nodded slowly. I understand, Admiral. I will deliver your message. Tanaka stood and offered her hand in what Vexorus assumed was a human gesture of agreement. He took it and felt the strength in her grip, despite her small size. Thank you, Commander, she said. I hope we never meet in battle again. As do I, Admiral. As the human delegation left, Dilla moved to stand beside Vexorus' commander. She said quietly, "If that was their defensive fleet, then what do their offensive ships look like?" Vexorus watched the humans walk away and felt fear settle into his bones. "I do not know," he admitted, "and I do not want to find out." 6 months after the Sol incident, the Galactic Council convened in an emergency session at their Greg Hall on the neutral world of Nexus. Prime representatives from over 300 species filled the massive chamber with their various bodies and voices and atmospheric requirements. The air hummed with translation devices, working overtime to convert thousands of languages into something everyone could understand. At the center of the chamber, High Commander Vexorus stood before the assembled delegates and told his story. He spoke of arriving at the Sol system with 200 warships, spoke of the human vessel that emerged to face them. He spoke of the battle that followed, and he spoke of the defeat. When he finished, the chamber was silent. No one moved or spoke or even seemed to breathe. The Zithrani had been undefeated for 12,000 years. They were the most powerful military force in the known galaxy, and they had been broken by 4 ships from a species that most of the Council had dismissed as insignificant. "You are certain of these numbers?" The Vethany ambassador finally asked. 153 ships destroyed. "I am certain," Vexorus replied with shame heavy in his voice. "I watched them die." 4 ships, the Crethany delegate repeated in disbelief. 4 human ships did this. 4 ships that we observed. Vexorus clarified, "We do not know how many more they have." A wave of uneasy murmuring swept through the chamber. "We must form a coalition," the Zithrani Emperor's representative declared. "We must unite our fleets and destroy this threat before it grows stronger." "With respect," Vexorus interrupted, "I do not recommend that course of action." "You would have us do nothing," the representative demanded. "I would have us be realistic." Vexorus activated the chamber's holographic display and showed the sensor data from the battle. "Our weapons barely scratched their armor," he explained. "Their weapons tore through our shields like they were not there. They are more advanced than us in every way that matters for war. A coalition of our fleets would simply give them more targets." The chamber erupted in arguments and accusations and frightened speculation. Some delegates demanded immediate military action, while others called for isolation and defense. A few suggested simply surrendering before the humans decided to expand. Then, a new voice cut through the chaos. "Perhaps you should ask the humans what they want before deciding how to respond." Every head turned toward the entrance of the chamber. A human woman stood there wearing formal diplomatic attire. She was flanked by 2 guards in civilian clothes, though their bearing made it clear they were military. "Who are you?" the council speaker demanded. "This is a closed session. I'm Ambassador Chun Wei-Lin of the United Earth Government," the woman replied calmly, "and I believe you were discussing my species." It seemed appropriate to join the conversation. She walked down the central aisle toward the speaker's platform with complete confidence, as if she belonged there. The assembled delegates watched her with a mixture of fear and fascination. This was the first time most of them had seen a human in person. She did not look like a monster. She looked like a small, soft creature with delicate features and an easy smile. But every being in that chamber knew what her kind was capable of. "The council did not invite humanity to address this session," the speaker said stiffly. "No, you did not." Wei-Lin agreed. "But we thought it best to speak for ourselves rather than let rumors and fear speak for us." She stopped at the center of the chamber and turned slowly to address the full assembly. "I know what you are thinking," she said. "You are thinking that humanity is a threat that must be contained or destroyed. You are thinking that our victory over the Zithrani proves we are dangerous. And you are right. We are dangerous." A ripple of alarm passed through the delegates. "But being dangerous is not the same as being a threat," Wei-Lin continued. "Humanity does not seek conquest or domination. We have no interest in ruling your worlds or subjugating your peoples. What we want is simple. We want trade and diplomacy and cultural exchange. We want to learn from you and share what we have learned. We want to take our place among the stars as partners, not as conquerors. Then why build such terrible weapons? A delegate called out. Wei Lin's expression grew somber. Because we have learned through bitter experience that peace must be protected. Our history is filled with examples of peaceful peoples who were destroyed because they could not defend themselves. We will not make that mistake. We hope we never have to use our weapons again. But if we are attacked, we will defend ourselves. And we will win. Her voice hardened on those last words, and every being in the chamber felt the truth of them. The Zithrani came to our system with an ultimatum, Wei Lin said. Submit or die. We chose neither. We sent them home with a message. That message is the same one I bring to you today. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many delegates as she could. Humanity offers friendship to those who treat us with respect. We offer fair trade and honest diplomacy and the chance to build something greater together. But we will not be threatened. We will not be intimidated. And we will not be conquered. The choice of how to deal with us is yours. Choose wisely. The chamber was utterly silent. Wei Lin waited. Finally, the council speaker cleared his throat. The council will deliberate on this matter, he said. Please wait outside, Ambassador. Wei Lin nodded gracefully and turned to leave as she walked past the Zithrani delegation. She paused briefly. No hard feelings, Commander Vexorus, she said quietly. You were doing your job, and so were we. Vexorus looked at this small human woman and felt something strange. It took him a moment to recognize it as respect. You are a formidable people, Ambassador, he said. We prefer the term survivors. Wei Lin replied with a slight smile. Then she was gone. The deliberations lasted for 3 days. Arguments raged back and forth as delegates debated the proper response to humanity's emergence. Some wanted war, despite the clear evidence that war would be catastrophic. Others wanted strict isolation, hoping that ignoring the humans would somehow make them go away. But in the end, pragmatism won. The Galactic Council voted unanimously to grant humanity full member status with all rights and responsibilities that entailed. They also created a new seat on the Security Council specifically for a human representative. It was the fastest admission in the Council's history, and the most unanimous as the delegates filed out of the chamber after the final vote. A young Bethany ambassador approached Ambassador Wei Lin, who had been waiting in the observation gallery. Ambassador, may I ask you something? He said nervously. Of course. The stories that High Commander Vexorus told about your history. The young alien hesitated. Are they true? Which stories specifically? That your species once fought a war that killed 70 million of your own kind in just 6 years. Wei Lin's expression grew distant. That war was called World War II, she said. And yes, it killed approximately 70 million humans. Though some estimates put the number higher. The Bethany stared at her with something like horror. How? He whispered. How does a species survive something like that? How do you live with that kind of loss? Wei Lin was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to look out the observation window at the stars beyond. We remember, she said softly. We build monuments and write books and tell stories so that we never forget what we did to each other. And we try to be better. Every generation we try to be a little bit better than the one that came before. Sometimes we fail, but we keep trying. That is all anyone can do. The young Vitheni looked at this human with new understanding. She was not a monster. She was something far more complex, a survivor of horrors that his species could barely imagine, a representative of a people who had crawled through hell and emerged with their humanity somehow intact. I think, he said slowly, that the galaxy has much to learn from your kind, Ambassador. And we have much to learn from you. Wei Lin replied. She offered him her hand in the human gesture of friendship. After A moment's hesitation he took in the months that followed the Sol incident became the most discussed event in galactic history stories. Spread across 1,000 worlds, carried by traders and diplomats and curious travelers. The stories grew and changed as stories always do. Some claimed that human ships were crewed by undying soldiers who felt no pain. Others said their vessels ran on captured stars or that they could see the future. Few whispered that humans ate their enemies after battle. The truth was arguably worse than any of the legends. Humans were simply mortal beings who had industrialized warfare to an art form. They had spent 10,000 years learning how to kill each other more efficiently, and that terrible education had made them more dangerous than any species the galaxy had ever seen. But along with the fear came something else. A new word began to spread across the galaxy. It was a human word that had no direct translation in most languages, but its meaning was understood. Word was deterrence. It meant having enough power that no one dared attack you. It meant being so dangerous that peace became the only rational option. Humanity had given the galaxy a new concept. The galaxy would never be quite the same on Earth. Admiral Keiko Tanaka stood on the bridge of the Wrath of Achilles as it underwent repairs in orbital dry dock. The ship had been badly damaged in the battle, but it would fly again. It always did. "Do you think they will leave us alone now?" her first officer asked. Tanaka watched the stars through the viewport and thought about all the civilizations that had risen and fallen throughout human history. "For now," she said.